Carla Damron, fiction writer. Oh, I enjoyed talking to Carla so much. She's written 5 books. We talk about her last 2. 2014, The Stone Necklace. Really great book. 5 people come together in a car crash, 5 different trajectories. But as she's writing this, she talks about how the characters communicate to her and they take over. They decide the direction as she's writing. It's fascinating the way her process and how these characters seem so real to her. I shouldn't say seem, but they are real to her. And I wouldn't say that a character might say to her as she's writing. I'm doing a poor job of representing what she does, but please listen. And it's absolutely wonderful. Her latest 2022 book, The Orchid Tattoo, deals with mental illness and human trafficking. You have these main characters that are Kitten and Georgia. Really, really great fiction books. Also, I ask her about the book industry. I ask her about how the difference between when she's writing between entertaining and educating, because she's also a social worker. But a great conversation with Carla. I really enjoyed it. I love talking to authors. I also draw the comparison at one point as how writing books are very similar to writing music. The conversations that I have with musicians, that with music, with songwriters, are very similar to what she describes when writing a book. It's amazing how the arts kind of blend into each other. But a great conversation with Carla. I know you're going to enjoy it. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business and it lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission, how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family, in their passion, in their careers, and how it helped them. Our podcast vision, growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Carla Damron, thank you so much for your time today. I'm very, very excited to talk to you. What, in your opinion, of course, what is the current state of fiction writing in books, literature?
So I feel like it's a crazy world. It's, the big 5 publishers have a lot of control. So it's there's sort of a dichotomy. There's these big publishers that have a lot of control, but then the rest is like the Wild West. You can self-publish, you can hybrid publish, and I like to do small indie publishers. I tend to do that. And more unique things come out there, I think. The big publishers like to go with what they feel like are going to be proven track record. You have proven track records. But, the smaller presses will be braver, I think. And that attracts me.
The bigger publishers have quarterly profits and they have board of directors. So they're selling the diet books and the cookbooks and these things that really sell, and the celebrity books. And that's really what they're after versus kind of getting good literature. Well, I'm sure some of it's good.
Pattersons and the Dan Browns, the things that have a following, they're going to go after the ones that they know are going to have the sales. Right.
Patterson and Dan Brown, of course. That eventually, turned into other things. Yeah, that's really, and self-publishing. I mean, I get to talk to so many authors who didn't want to go through any publisher and just, did it themselves, got an editor to edit it and put it right out. And oftentimes it's very, very good. It's a great time.
Yeah, and you said the most important thing, and that's
Uh-oh.
get an editor.
Hmm.
A lot of people will self-publish, just I wrote a book, I'm going to publish it. And that's
Whoa.
not the way to go. You have to have another set of eyes to just, look for mistakes, look for, because if you've written it, you're not going to see those. I don't see mine. I need lots of eyes on my writing. So I just think that's so, so important. I mean, the good news is anyone can be published, and the bad news is anyone can be published.
Yeah, yeah, that is very true. And yeah, once you're inside of it, I work on lots of projects, and once you're knee deep in it, you can't see it from outside. So you've got to step away and get opinions from others. It's just the nature of it, and just being able
Exactly.
to
Well, plus
have
writing
to.
is communication, right?
Mm,
So I put the words on the paper. That's just half of the communication. The second half is readers reading what I wrote and getting what I meant. And that's when I need an editor to say, no, I didn't quite understand this, or no, you kind of bored me here, or no, it kind of sagged here. If I
mm.
want my point to get to the readers, I want to tighten it as much as I can. So I need editors and people that will help me with revision, critiquers to give me that feedback.
While you're writing, do you constantly have the mind and the thoughts of the reader?
I do. I'm always think. I mean, not. I wouldn't say it's constant, but I want what I write to be a good reading experience. I think that's
Mm.
very important. So I do try to imagine just, how is this affecting the person that's taking in my words? I do try to think about that.
Hmm. I heard you say that you do a lot of reading and you do it for pleasure, but you also do it for craft.
I sure do.
Maybe reflect. Yeah. So you're working even though you're having fun, I guess is the way to look at
Right.
it.
Well, and I tend to be reading two things at once.
Huh.
I'll reading something that's just I'm just going to dive into this and be entertained, and then I'll be reading something that I think is written by a master like Elizabeth Strauss. She's one of my favorites, and
Mm.
then I'm looking at wow, that sentence. Let me take a minute and look at that sentence and what she did with it. Or look at that character detail and how clever it was. So
Mm.
I'm still learning. I feel like that's going to class when I read from really fine writers.
It's wonderful. I've heard some of your, who you like to read, and I didn't hear the name Barbara Kingsolver. Do
I
you?
do love Barbara
Oh yeah,
Kingsolver.
she's
Yeah, I
great.
just got a new one and I haven't read it yet,
Yeah,
but I have it.
yeah.
It's going on vacation with me.
Boy, that Poisonwood Bible just changed everything for it. I just wow. This
That
is
thing just grabs you in the
it
gut.
does.
It
It
just
does.
grabs you, and I still can remember scenes from that book. It just
Yeah.
blew me away.
Yeah, yeah, they go to the missionary and yeah, oh my goodness. And those kinds of real kind of lessons that you're well, I want to talk about this because it's just so fascinating to me. I'm sorry to scramble, but you talk about how your characters take on a role by themselves. You really can't fully outline because you're writing and they're doing stuff that you didn't have in mind. You have to what does that mean, Carla? How does that work?
It's a little ill. But yeah, it's like once a character becomes alive for me, and that's really how it feels. I
Mm,
almost feel like they're just sitting there telling me the story.
wow.
And it's really wonderful, and it can be terrible because it's like sometimes I have in mind that they should go over here, and they have in mind, no, they're going to go over here. And I am
Wow.
never going to win that argument. For example, in the Orchid Tattoo, I had a character that really, from the very beginning, from her inception, I truly believed that she would need to die. I thought she would need to die at the end of the book. And she is still alive and well
Wow.
because it just wasn't the right thing for her. I mean, she was just not going to go. And readers have really commented on that and how, oh, I can't wait to imagine what's going to happen next with her. So I think it was the right call that she made.
I mean, are you arguing with this character in your head? I mean, I
I
can't.
actually wrote a short story about that, about a writer who's writing a murder scene, and the character's looking over her shoulder and says, "Oh, I would never say that." And she gets into this argument with the character, and needless to say, she does not win. So yeah, it's really so I can't be somebody who completely outlines the course of the novel because once I do like to have the main thread outlined in my
Right.
brain, but the rest of it I need to let develop because as the characters develop life, I really need to listen to them. They're going to make if I listen to them, it's going to be a richer work.
But the beginning stages and the of creating these characters, that's by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody just kind of appears to you say, "Hey, I'm a 25-year-old blah blah blah," and they're oh, okay, you're going to be in my book. It's not like that. So you actually do start them in your imagination.
The writer Rex Stout said something. I thought, Rex Stout.
I don't.
He wrote the Nero Wolfe books back in the 40s.
Okay.
Nero Wolfe Mysteries. But he said something that I thought captured it well. He said characters are either conceived or contrived. And so the contrived characters are the ones that you do have to kind of piece together. I'm going to take this characteristic and this characteristic, and eventually they're going to become a whole person. A conceived character, though, almost just arrives like you described. It's like, here I am, my character Lillian, the one I was mentioning in the Orchid Tattoo. I felt like I just had this flash of this woman with red hair driving a convertible. And it was like, there she was. And I knew her, and I knew what her personality was like, and I knew why she was trapped and all of these things. And it was just that fast.
Wow. Yeah, Carla, you tell a story about how you're at work and you're acting like you're taking notes, but you're like looking at the characters in the room and saying, "Hey, that's kind of like my character has those eyebrows," and they would kind of say something like that, and you're kind of pulling from everyday life and soaking it into your book. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I think for me at least, I have a part of my brain that is always working on the novel. I need to keep the novel with me. I can't always be at the computer writing or with the notebook writing, but I need to have it in my brain. And so that's kind of part of how that happens, I think.
And okay, so let's go to 2014, the Stone Necklace. So you have, these five people come together, and I want people to read it, but it's a car crash, and there's like a grieving widow, there's a struggling nurse, right? A young mother, a homeless man. The homeless man I relate to. I don't know why, but I do. Maybe my name, but where did you get the idea of bringing these groups of people together like that?
So I just had the idea of exactly what you described. I had the idea of a man who was kind of a hypochondriac. Always thought he was having a heart attack.
Right.
And I sort of did a what if exercise. What if this man always thinks he's having a heart attack? What if he actually has a heart attack? What if he has that heart attack when he's in the car? What if it causes an accident? What would happen to the people whose lives intersect at that event of the accident, one way or another? How would it have changed them? That was sort of like, it became like an exercise. And I started visualizing the different characters. And I had more characters than that. The novel had potential to be 800 pages. So that was just never going to work. So I narrowed it down to 5 point of view characters. And it actually sent me to school. I decided that to finish that novel, I needed to work on my craft. I needed to understand the craft a little bit more. And I went and got my MFA so I could finish that novel. But I was fascinated by that. And I was fascinated by how each person would be, like Sandy, the nurse who's in recovery from drug addiction. What would it be like to be working in a really stressful event, medical situation when she's under so much scrutiny? His wife, Lena, who's lived this kind of life of denial because she never knew what all was really happening with her financial situation. And all of that gets exposed. What would it be like for her? Becca, who's the daughter, who's had this hidden eating disorder. Certainly this is going to make all of that surface. Now, in my other life, I'm a social worker, right? I'm a clinical social worker. So understanding dynamics like that's really important part of my life and my work. And it has always fascinated me. But it's also about recovery. I'm a true believer in recovery, and I wanted that message to be kind of infused in that work.
Yeah, can we talk more about you get to a certain point in the book where you don't feel that you can write it out, finish it, and you stop and you get your master's of fine arts. You go back to school. I mean, at what point do you say this is more than I can handle? What explain that, please, Carla? It's
You mean the book?
fascinating.
Why the book?
Yes.
Well, I was right because I had all these different point of view characters, and it was a giant chaotic mess.
Mm,
I mean, it was like, and before, that was my fourth book. My other novels had been mysteries. With a
right.
mystery, it's contained. There's sort of a little bit of a formula to mysteries, right?
Interesting.
And I was doing something that wasn't a mystery at all. It was more women's fiction or upmarket commercial fiction. So I didn't have that roadmap of how a mystery would go. And without a roadmap, I was like completely floundering, as I
Wow.
am if I don't have GPS in my car. I'm just
Sure.
driving around going down dead ends and not knowing where I'm going because I have no sense of direction. So I needed to get a sense of direction to tackle this. And so I went to a low residency program and that really focused on craft, not on becoming a teacher, but on your craft. And that's exactly what I needed. And it was
Mm,
hard. It was really hard. I was not a 25-year-old, I was a mature student.
mm.
And I had to be able to listen to this feedback, some of which was pretty painful, but helped me see what I was doing wrong and what I needed to change in terms of how I was going about this project.
Wow. And so how long did it take you to write the stone necklace, including getting your Master of Fine Arts, your
I
MFA?
worked on it 5 or 6 years total. I was working
Wow.
on other stuff too, but yeah, I worked a long time on that one.
And you mentioned before that you're always writing. So just having breakfast, you just characters kind of come in and out.
Pretty much, and even in my, I'll dream about them.
Wow.
I've dreamed plot scene resolutions. They're just kind of a
Have
part
you
of my
really?
brain. It's like I have all these people living in my head. So, but I
So
love it, so it's okay.
will you be having dinner with your husband and he's talking to you and you're just kind of looking right through him and he'll have to kind of snap you out of it? I mean, is it
No, it's not. Usually, I can be attentive, but there are times he'll comment on this. Like I'll be at a restaurant or something. We'll be at a restaurant, and he'll look at me. He'll say, "You're not paying any attention to me at all." And I'll say, "No, because the couple behind you is having a fascinating conversation, and I'm taking mental notes."
Didn't he once say, as long as people are dying in your novels and not outside of it, it's going to be okay, or something
He
to
says,
that?
"As long as I can kill people in my fiction, he feels safe." Yeah,
That's wonderfully supportive. So, you've got so many awards for that book. By the way,
yeah.
is the publishing industry fair to authors?
I mean, I don't. I mean, it's hard to say. I feel very pleased that that book won those awards. I can't say that I'll ever retire to the beach with what I earned on that book,
Right, right,
or anything like that. But I'm pleased. It touched people. That's what matters to me the most. I mean,
right.
I've had readers reach out to me and told me just incredible things. Just about how it helped them understand their own grief and just all of that. Or they understood a family member who has an eating disorder that they didn't quite understand. And so if it does that, I may not being paid with money, but I'm being paid in so many other ways that make me rich.
Yeah, I watched a particular, not really a town hall, but I think you were at a bookstore, and for the next book, for the Orchid Tattoo, and you partner with a great nonprofit, for Freedom, and your comment was, just to make sure we don't make any money, I'm donating a portion of this to them.
Exactly.
Nice,
Yeah,
nice to have a sense of
I
humor.
mean, I'm a social worker and a novelist.
Right.
I'm determined to be poor. I don't know what else I could go into except for become a nun.
Do you long for a day where somebody turns this into a movie or something big like
Oh,
that?
that would be amazing. I would
Yeah.
love that. I think the stone necklace would be an incredible, like a mini series. I think it's got
Mm.
that kind of depth. The orchid tattoo would be an incredible film. But that is, and also I'd like to win the lottery, and I think they're
Sure.
about this. The odds are about the same, but I
Yeah.
can fantasize.
And what if okay, let's just go there for a moment, Carla. What if somebody picked it up and chose a particular actor or actress that you didn't fit the role. You don't have them in mind.
That would be really difficult because I
Yeah.
understand that if that happens, you have no control or even any
Right.
say. So
Right.
that would be really hard. Um, and sometimes books, I mean, books can be made into films and just not do well. They just don't come
Yes.
together. And so all of that I think would be a challenge and would be very, very hard. Like
Mm.
Sue Grafton, the
Oh
writer
yeah.
Sue Grafton, she wouldn't let her stuff be made into films or movies because
Whoa.
or TV show because she worked in that industry and she knew what they would do to it.
Huh. So many times I saw the movie, but the book was so much better. So many times you've done it, I've done it, it's just because in the book you could, there's somebody sitting still and you could just go back and you could, there's just so much more freedom. Uh,
Yeah,
and
I
movies are
like
trying to put butts in seats.
exactly. And plus, they have to condense. They have to do so much condensing,
Right.
and so what they're going to choose to omit might not be what you would choose to
Mm.
omit. But um, Olive Kitteridge, which is one of my very favorite books by Elizabeth
Yes.
Strout, they did a mini series of that on HBO, and that was spectacular. Frances McDormand
Huh.
played her, and she was played Olive Kitteridge, and she was phenomenal. So
Wow.
it can be done well. It can
Mm.
be done well. The challenge is like for me as if I'm a reader and I love characters, I'll have a I'll have a vision of what the character should be like, and you go to a film and it's like, well, they didn't. That's not how she looks. So, but that's just my personal thing.
Yeah, I'm in my 50s, and I would listen to music, when I was a kid in the 80s, and then like these music videos would come on, and I would think, boy, that song, I did not picture that. And then all of a sudden, all these videos come over and they start taking over what the song, what you visualize in the song, and that could happen, there as well. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but you just have a certain view of what you think, the song reminds you of, puts you in a place or whatever it may be. Uh, but it's so hard because then you have to get a screen, like somebody's got to write a screenplay based on the novel. And that's a very different discipline there, right? I mean, then you're creating acts and dialogue and
And you're taking what 400 pages and making it 150 pages or
right.
so. But what would be marvelous for me is like the Orchid Tattoo, which has a specific message. For that to be made into a film that would reach even a bigger group of people would just
Mm,
mean the world to me. I would forgive
mm.
anything else if it accomplished that.
Yeah, so the Orchid Tattoo, you deal with mental illness, with human trafficking. You have the main character Kitten, and you have Georgia, who's the like this main protagonist, social worker looking for a missing sister. Now, you're a social worker. I mean, did it take much from you?
Does the job take much from me?
Did you model the
Oh
character
yeah,
as yourself?
Georgia's a lot like me. Georgia's
Really?
kind of sense of humor and poor judgment is a lot like me. I don't hear voices though. Georgia has mental illness, and
Right.
she hears voices. Although I have all these characters living in my head, so it's not that far. It's not that big of a stretch, but I wanted Georgia to have mental illness, but be functional and
Mm.
hardworking and managing her life. And the illness is a part of who she is, but it's not defining her. That was real important to me.
Yeah, you make the point that so many times in novels, movies, etc., the mental ill person is the victim. I'm sorry, is the perpetrator, right? It does the crimes, does everything, but you wanted to people can still be functional and be good and with mental illness.
Exactly. And we need more of that out there. I truly believe it. I worked in mental health for over 30 years. I worked with people with serious mental illness that held down jobs and, lived full lives. But, the trick was to get in control of their symptoms as best they could. And just like people that have diabetes need to be in control of their illness
Right.
and manage it as best they can. And so I really felt like that was an important message to get out there.
Yeah, and the human trafficking aspect of this, you bring points out. You're from Columbia, South Carolina, and great community there. And you talk about going to the book clubs and being part of that, and people asking, back in the other book, where did this accident happen? And you put a church where the cemetery was, and things like that. And it's part of the community. It's so rich. It's so this must be so rewarding. But the human trafficking element, you bring such points out about foster children are susceptible to it and what happens there. And it's not these underground people. It's people that are just kind of grooming them every day. It's so horrible as to what's happening there. How could you write about such a subject like that that's so treacherous?
It was therapeutic in a way,
Mm,
because I had done some advocacy work in that area and had heard so many stories and met survivors and law enforcement and advocates. And just when I saw how big of an issue it is here, and then I realized it was a big issue everywhere, I felt
mm,
compelled to write, to do what I could, which was to write something that would be, entertaining and, a good read, a good, exciting read, but would also kind of let people kind of shine a light on something that needs to have a light shined on it,
mm,
for just how this crime happens and how common it is. And this, it's a work of fiction. This is not, it's not an essay. It's pulled from my mind, and it's a little manipulative in terms of how I set up the main bad guy, have him doing all these different kinds of trafficking, because I wanted to kind of highlight all the different kinds of trafficking that happens. That's a pretty unusual situation, that one trafficker would be involved in all of those enterprises, but
mm.
mine's a very shrewd guy. so, so I wanted to do that, and I wanted to get readers kind of more interested in what we can do as citizens to address this crime.
Yeah, how do you draw the line between educating and entertaining? It's got to be a tough one, right? Because then you kind of bring in your own, do people ever push back? I mean, that's got to be a struggle, Carla.
The biggest struggle was to write the story with the horrors without it being too horrible to read. That was the biggest struggle. So I wound up having to, I had some pretty graphic scenes in there that I removed for that very reason, because it was too difficult for people to read. And so I wanted the book to be readable. And some people find it uncomfortable to read in places, which I fully understand. But without going into all of the graphic details that could be just so off-putting, and especially when you're dealing with teenagers, that can be just so grueling and hard for people to read. So I felt like my audience, a lot of my audience are mothers, and so I needed mothers to be able to finish this book. So that was kind of one thing I focused on, was to make it readable without it being unrealistic. I didn't want to soft sell what trafficking is and what trafficking does. But I also wanted to talk about and highlight the survivors, and just how, how they live, and how a lot of them can recover. They can move on with their lives. And so I felt like that was important too. I think there's a resilience in human beings that's pretty amazing, pretty amazing. And I thought Kitten was a good example of that. She never surrendered her soul to that life.
Mm. Have we talked about hiring an editor before, how important it is? Have you ever gotten a conflict with the editor saying they should add or remove something when you didn't feel it was in order?
The first time that happened was way back when, my first novel, Keeping Silent. I have a character in there who has schizophrenia, and an editor said, "Well, why don't you make that character more menacing?" And
Hmm.
I'm like, "No, we don't do that. I will never do that. That's been way overdone." And so I said, and it was really hard to say that, because it's like, this is an editor, and it's like,
Right.
and then they said, "Well, what if you made this other character more menacing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm fine with that." so,
Huh.
so that was kind of interesting.
And
Um,
why the difference?
The difference was I didn't want a character who had schizophrenia to be late to be a bad guy. You
Ah,
know, we've done that too much. We don't
right.
need to do that anymore. So yeah, so and I could see why you needed in terms of plot, you need to have these red herrings, but not her. I couldn't let it be her. So, but mostly I find with editors you have to be open to their feedback, and if there's something you absolutely don't want to do, it's good to have an alternative. Say,
Hmm.
well, what if instead of that we did this? Would that accomplish what you want? That kind of thing.
Compromise, Carla. Yes, have a
Compromise.
compromise.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a character in a previous book approach you while writing a new book and say, "Why aren't I here?"
So I was in the middle of writing the Orchid tattoo. This is going to sound really weird. Let me just warn
Yes.
you.
It's
I
all
was in
right.
the middle of writing the Orchid tattoo, and I dreamed a scene that was the Caleb Knowles mystery series features Caleb and his brother Sam, who's a deaf artist. I dreamed a scene between those two brothers.
Wow.
I hadn't written a Caleb Knowles novel in, I don't know, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years. That scene was so vivid that it prompted me to write the fourth Caleb Knowles novel, which I just finished writing. It was the character of Caleb, who's the social worker, who's the main character in that series, and his brother Sam, who was a deaf artist. And it was kind of a crisis scene in this dream. And I woke up from it and it was just so vivid. And I thought, well, okay, I guess they want to come back, those two characters. And so I wrote the scene and then I started imagining what else would have happened in their lives since then. And then I wrote a novel. And Justice Be Done is the fourth Caleb Knowles novel, and I just sent it off to the publisher.
Wow.
So it was like, I told you it was weird. It was like,
Do you have a notepad next to your bed?
I do, but I don't tend to use it. I can usually remember.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. It's that vivid and strong that you remembered in the morning.
Oh, it was very, very vivid, very strong, it was a long scene that's in the book,
Wow. Wow. And when you write, are you pen and paper? Are you typing?
mostly typing.
Never handwriting?
Sometimes handwriting, depending on the situation. Sometimes I'll handwrite if I'm outside or I just need a break from the computer. I'll do
Mm.
that. But I tend to just sit down and type.
And with your editor, do you finish everything and give it to them, or do you give them pieces and they come back?
So I tend to finish. Well, I have a critique partner that sees chunks of it.
Ah,
And then when it's completely finished, I have a couple of people that will read the whole thing and give me very thorough, honest feedback. And then I'll do a couple of rewrites before I send it off to my agent or editor.
will you ever do nonfiction?
I don't really imagine doing that. I've done essays, but doing a whole nonfiction book just is not as exciting to me because I like my imagination,
Mm.
and with nonfiction, I need to be real.
Yeah. Are there really two kinds of writers, fiction and nonfiction?
I think there's a whole lot of overlap,
Mm.
um, but I think the way we think might be a little different.
Right. Because fiction is tends to bring things in, and I have friends who've written nonfiction in a fiction type. They make characters up to kind of prove their point over, and the whole process is. So as a child, you were actually on stage a lot. You were actually part of the community, but you actually didn't find writing till much later.
Well, I wrote a little as a child, and it was always something I enjoyed doing, but then I got away from it. And I was always a big reader.
Right.
And then I decided, yeah, I want to try writing. I want to give this a shot. It was always kind of, I think, in the back of my brain, there's something I wanted to do, but I just never really committed to it until later.
Because your family is certainly, it would seem in the arts, your brother is a mime in Sweden.
Yes.
It's
My brother's
wonderful.
my mother was a theater director, so
Ah,
we were in a little community theater, so we were put on stage from really young. I did properties when I was 11. Yeah, I did lights when I was 14. Um, and I think that background was really helpful to my writing because I find myself staging things. I'm always kind of when I do a scene, I kind of block it. Where are people sitting, where are people standing. What's the background like? I just kind of my mind kind of works that way.
it's just so you kind of storyboard,
I do a bit, yeah.
but you never draw it out.
Mm-mm. Just in my brain,
Wow.
my sad little brain.
Nothing sad about it at all, Carla. So you would think to yourself, you imagining this particular scene happening, and you look at it from the outside.
Right.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, I try to do kind of long, big picture, little picture. What's the whole room look like? How does
Right.
it feel? What are they listening? What can they hear? And then what's the dynamic between the characters?
Are you always writing?
I'm always working on something. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And I've always, like I said, there's like a little part of my brain that's always working.
Huh.
It's like writing is not just sitting down and typing.
Right.
Writing is thinking too.
Hmm.
Just kind of there's a lot of problem solving, a lot. And so sometimes you just have to kind of step back and like I was at a basketball game with my husband and I was totally working through a scene in my brain. Totally. I was sort of paying attention to the game, but I was like, how is that going to happen? How am I going to reveal that? That was kind of what I was really doing.
Have you ever, you talk about how your characters don't want to do something or never do it. Have you ever kind of disregarded that and said, this is the way it's going to be and that's it?
No, that would never work for me.
Wow. 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 So,
No, I
Carla,
have had
I'm sorry.
characters that because the way they changed and evolved, I kind of had to pull them out because they just didn't
Ah,
work anymore, you know, and I had to
interesting.
try again with something else, someone else. Yeah, I've had that happen.
And you receive this from the character, not from the editor or from outside people.
No, usually it's the character.
Wow. And will you shelf them and bring them back later?
Yeah, I try to. Yeah, it's like this character needs to come back, or I can use that character in something else. Yeah.
So you have a library of characters in your mind. You don't commit these to paper at all.
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I'll do like a little sketch or something.
Huh.
Not a drawing sketch, but a written sketch,
Right.
and I'll have like a little file.
Huh.
Like there's always things that you have to pull out of your writing that you really liked, but it just doesn't work anymore, doesn't
Mm.
fit anymore. So I always have a file like good parts, a good parts file. It just maybe I'll use it somewhere else. It helps me to remove stuff if I can imagine that I might use it somewhere else, as opposed to just deleting it.
It's fascinating that what you describe so eloquently is very similar to artists, musical artists that I talk to. They say the same thing. I put this part over here. This just didn't work. Something spoke to me here. I'm going to push it out for later. And this worked here. And this wanted to go in a direction. There's the great story where we hear that Bob Dylan wrote All Along the Watchtower, released it, and within a couple of weeks, Jimi Hendrix started playing it. And Bob Dylan saw Jimi Hendrix or heard it and said, "I will no longer play it. That's the way it should have been played."
Wow, that's amazing.
So he didn't give myself chills. So it came to him, but it wasn't his.
Right. And another artist made it his,
That's right.
and it was sublime.
I hear that often with music that it comes. So I
Magic.
think it's the same thing with authors, right? These characters are coming to you and they're speaking to you, and you have to abide and guide and tie them all in.
And it's just, the imagination is an amazing thing. It just is. It's like it taps into something I can't describe. But I'm very, very happy to have it in my life, you
Yes, you
know.
are. Well, wasn't it Albert Einstein who said imagination is much more important than intelligence?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So on the podcast, Carla, well, I always bring up the story about I started my business in the 90s and I gained a lot of weight. I wasn't paying attention to myself. I was eating too much and drinking soda and working way too hard. And I blew up to 340 pounds. The doctor said to me, if you don't lose the weight, you're not going to see your daughter graduate. She had just been born, and that's all I needed to hear. And spent, I lost a lot of weight, spent a long time doing it and changed everything I did. And people always ask me, how did you do it? They want something like it's some secret. And I always say discipline, just got to focus on discipline. How does discipline play a role in your life, Carla?
Well, I feel like to finish a novel, you have to be disciplined.
Finishing.
Starting a novel, yeah, starting a novel is fun.
Ah,
Finishing a novel is pretty fun. The middle part can be hell.
really?
And I don't really know why. It's just that, but I think every writer will say this.
Huh.
There was a writer that I read, Carolyn Wheat said, writing a novel is like driving through Texas. you know, it's just like it feels like it's never going to end. The scenery is just the same. You just got to keep going. So you have to. I feel like there are a lot of unfinished novels in closets of writers all over the
Wow.
world.
Wow.
Um, and so just knowing, making the commitment to yourself and to the project to stay with it. And when you get to a place where you feel blocked, work through it. um,
Hmm.
you know, uh, do whatever you need to do to get to the next step. I think that takes discipline. I'm
Wow.
pretty committed to a routine. I get up, get my coffee. I always read first thing. I love to read. Then I start writing after about an hour or so. Get something to drink. And so then there's a discipline of what we call butt in chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, butt in chair is really important. Although I have a standing desk too, so
Oh,
sometimes I'm
nice.
standing, but still. So that's just very, just making the commitment to be there. And then keeping the novel with me, that requires some discipline,
Mm.
keeping it, making sure if you spend too much time away from it, you're going to feel like you're starting over when you come back. And that is hell. So you want to
Right.
kind of keep it with you, and it just becomes a part of your life. You need to embrace it as a part of your life and accept that it's like another person living in your house. Your family needs to accept that this novel is like another person living in your
Mm.
house, and just just accept that and make a commitment to follow through to finish it. It's a glorious thing to finish it. It's
Really?
I always talk about how when you finish a draft, they really should throw you a parade. Yeah, I mean, it's like you've written 380 pages. There should be a parade,
Wow.
but there's usually not. And then, I usually kind of put it away for a little while because when you first write a novel, you're in love with it, and
Mm.
you need to be less in love with it to do your revision. So I need to have some distance, and then I pull it back, and then I start. Oh, what was I thinking here? Oh, and then I'm working on rewriting, revising, rewriting, tightening, and doing all of that. So, yeah, it's a huge commitment. So you have to really be dedicated, and it does require discipline. It doesn't require like militaristic discipline, but it requires a firm commitment.
Focus.
This is going to be important to you.
Mm.
I remember years ago making the decision that when people would call and say, "Well, what are you doing?" I used to say, "Oh, I'm just writing," which meant, of course, I'm free to do whatever you want to do. Now, when people ask me what I'm doing, I'm saying I'm working.
Ah.
So that means I can't do anything else. I'm going to
Mm.
be working for the next 2 hours or whatever. I'll be working till 1, and then we can do something, just honoring it that way.
Mm. You mentioned a morning routine. You have coffee. You say you do reading. Do you read fiction or are you reading the newspaper, nonfiction? What do you?
Fiction,
You're reading fiction.
absolutely. Yeah.
Interesting. And are you afraid sometimes if you read so much fiction that'll start to influence your stories?
I don't really worry about that just because of how my age and my voice, my literary voice is pretty, I feel like it's
I
very
matured.
familiar and it's
Uh,
pretty solid. I think for young writers, that's a thing. You don't
mm,
want, I think young writers are more likely to try to copy what they read.
mm,
I don't
mm.
feel like I do that. But I do analyze what I'm reading. I usually try to read, that's what I'm doing my craft reading, and
Right.
say, oh wow, what are they doing that's really great here?
Huh. Look at the use of the words, how economical it is, and how it's weaving in.
Mhm.
Yeah, I notice that too sometimes. Do you journal or meditate?
I don't journal. I don't meditate much. Now and then I'll meditate, but I'm not very loyal about that.
And you don't journal because it'll be wasting your writing. You write when you're writing fiction.
I did the artist way one time, and it's like I don't want to do these morning pages. I want to get on my book. It's just like I want to. My words are for that,
Wow. And when you write in on the computer, do you do like stream of consciousness, or are you fixing spelling along the way? Does this all pour it out?
I tend to just draft.
Hmm.
If I'm stumbling with something though or blocked, I might go back and revise instead
Hmm.
because as long as I'm still doing something with the project, that's what matters, as opposed to just forcing myself to write when it's not working. Sometimes I have to just take a break, and so I'll go back and do some editing or revision or refamiliarize myself with the whole thing to just kind of see what I need to do next. Yeah.
It's your fifth novel, and you just mentioned a clear distinction when you were telling people that you were writing versus working. I wonder if I asked you back at your first novel how you view discipline, would it be different now?
Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, I probably wouldn't have told you I was writing. I was a
Uh,
closeted writer for
uh,
for most of the first book. I was
really?
like, it was a, it's like, shh, don't tell anyone I'm writing a book.
Why?
I don't know. But I remember the first person I told was my sister, and she said, I asked her if she would, I said, I was going to be brave and let someone look at it, and she was the one I chose, and so I remember I was dating my husband at the time, and I hadn't even told him. And I said,
Wow.
so I finally said, well, I wrote something, and my sister's going to look at it, and I'm going to mail it to her. And he goes, oh, how long is it? I said, 400 pages. He was like, 400
Was
pages?
that 100,000 words?
Yeah. So, yeah, that was when I was starting to come out of the closet. I'm pretty firmly out of the closet now.
I say, how were you able to write 100,000 words without telling your boyfriend at the time? That's
Well, I mean, it was just something I did.
wow. Wow. And now you love, do you look forward to a day where you'll just do it full time? And
I'm kind of doing it full time now. I mean,
uh,
I'm mostly retired. I have a small part
uh,
time job and I do a lot of volunteer work. So this is my main career right now, and I like it. It's really nice.
well, you're
It
great at
it
it.
gives me to have that breathing space and
Mm,
the time, because as opposed to having to write, working for 9 hours, 10 hours, and then coming home and trying to write, was
right.
really stressful.
Mm.
This is much better.
Do you work well with deadlines?
No, I tend to just give myself
I
deadlines.
say.
I don't have a contract where I have deadlines, so that's good.
Hmm.
But I
Carla,
do like to say I want to finish this much by this month. You
mm,
know.
there's the discipline.
Hmm.
Yes. Yeah. Carla Damron, what motivates you?
Um, I guess I'm motivated by chocolate, caffeine, and
Wait a
my
second.
imagination.
Chocolate. This is maybe the greatest answer ever. Chocolate, caffeine, and imagination. I have to write this down. That's CCI. That's
Yeah, there we go.
So we'll start at the beginning. Chocolate. Is it dark chocolate? Is it milk chocolate? Is it Swiss chocolate?
I am a multi chocolate lover.
Really?
Just about any chocolate is fine as long as it's in my mouth.
And caffeine, you have to have coffee.
I do, but I had to reduce my caffeine intake.
Why? What
So
was it
I
doing?
drink kind of one third caffeinated and two-thirds
Ah,
decaf. But I love that ritual of my first cup of coffee and my book. That's just that's just a sublime thing for me.
Absolutely amazing. You know, I never had a cup of coffee my whole life.
That's
54.
amazing to
Yeah,
me.
54. And I see how people just have that ritual and just love it. You know, all my family, everybody I know it does, but I just never had it. So I see that, and it looks really, really comforting. And
We
then of
call it
course,
we call it writer juice.
you call say it again?
Writer juice.
A rider juice.
Coffee is writer juice.
Yeah. Yeah, it gets you going. Yeah, that's amazing. And then of course imagination, your third.
Hmm. Yeah, it's always. I had a real big, vivid imagination when I was a kid. I had 26 invisible horses in my backyard when I was a child. So I've always had a very, very vivid imagination,
I'm
and
not
it's.
familiar with this. 26.
I had 26 imaginary horses in my backyard when I was a child.
They all have a name?
I think most of them had names.
Wow.
And I remember one day it was raining, and my mother got worried because I went running out to gather up my 26 imaginary horses to bring them in the house. And my younger brother was standing at the door going, one, two.
Isn't that nice? This is the mime now? This
This
is
is the
the
mine. Yeah.
Did he do it silently? Was he counting silently?
No, he was counting out loud.
As a joke, of course. How do you measure success?
I measure success by how I affect readers.
Mm,
Um, and I get to hear from readers and reviews. That's important too. But especially, I feel like I have a relationship with readers even if I've never met them, if they've
mm.
read my work. And so if it's touched them in any way or made them think in any way, then I feel really blessed.
Do you have to deal with trolls at all?
Not much. Now and then I have, but not much.
Good, good.
I
Well,
guess that's good about not being a big, big name. I don't have to do that yet.
you have to deal with that. Yeah, yeah, because you know there's a certain place, and you know trolls are trolls, but the people overwhelmingly that you hear back from that you know, there's great videos of you on your website and podcasts of you speaking to a book club or at a bookstore at an opening, and you do a really good job. You command it up there, and people are attentively listening. And one with your ex-publisher was really good, off the top of my head, and or not, I shouldn't say ex, one of your previous publishers.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was really nice. And the people in the crowd are asking. It's really, really cool how you're able to create all this, Carla, from your imagination.
yeah, and I just feel really lucky that I have it, and that it does affect people. I just, as a social worker, I mean, I feel like this is how I practice social work mostly now is through my writing.
Through your writing, yeah. Yeah, you're helping others. Well, Carla, thank you so much for your time today. Just an absolute pleasure. I was so excited when you accepted this. How can we get in touch with you?
So I'm easy to reach. My website is carladamron.com, Carla Damron, Damron.com. I'm on Facebook, and my email is Carla Damron Writer, WRITER, at gmail.com.
Make sure I put all those in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time today.
It was great talking to you.
It was
This was a lot of fun.
wonderful talking to you. If I'm in the neighborhood, perhaps my girlfriend, your husband, and we can all go out and maybe have a cup of coffee. I'll have some tea, but I look forward to maybe talking to you face to face in the future. You be well, Carla. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources, and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. Seems like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Disciplined Conversations.